One question I keep getting asked a lot, especially in the last couple of weeks, is about doing how to do a vegan Passover. And I get asked it a lot. I guess it's kind of a simple answer. I don't understand, the confusion about it. I think a lot of people still think that you have to take a lamb out and slaughter it. The Jewish Passover Seder does not involve meat. So if you want to do a vegan Passover, the bitter herbs, the horseradish, all that stuff, like none of it's all vegan. It's all plant-based. The only thing you got to do is just leave off the egg and don't put a lamb shank bone on the plate, and you've got a vegan Passover. If you don't want to, you may not want to mention the sacrifice of the lamb. We're relatively sure, based on the information we have historically, that the lamb part was probably added from pagan traditions in Egypt. Epiphanius says that in the Panarion, he mentions that the pagans in Egypt still to that day, which would have been the 4th century Common Era, even to that day that the Egyptians slaughter a lamb at the turn of the year, the spring. So the lamb part probably came from paganism, but the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which of course, is vegan, is probably the original tradition. So you can do a Seder, just do the regular Jewish Seder if that's what you want to do, or there are several messianic versions of it, but none of them require meat. Just leave the egg off the plate if you don't eat eggs. If you're vegetarian, then it doesn't matter. And just don't put the lamb bone on the plate, and there you got a vegan Passover. If you want to know about the Passover from sources outside of the Bible, I've got this book that I talk about a lot, Velikovsky's Worlds in Collision, and this other book by Immanuel Velikovsky, Ages in Chaos, from the Exodus to King Akhenaten. There's several Ages in Chaos, but this is part 1. I guess you can see it there. And what he does is he has Egyptian sources that describe what happened during the Exodus event. There's this scroll of Ippawar, and then there's some sort of a carving that was discovered, and several other sources. Those are the two that I remember. But he goes in, he tells you what the sources say, and he's got an interesting theory that the death of the firstborn, when the blood of the lambs were on the doorpost, the death of the firstborn, what Velikovsky speculates based upon the information that he has from these Egyptian sources, was not actually the death of the firstborn child. It was the death of the primary people. The Hebrew word for firstborn is very similar to the chiefs of the people, the firstborn of the people versus the chiefs of the people. So it's like one Hebrew letter difference, and it's two letters that look very similar anyway. And then Velikovsky also goes into mentions of the Exodus and the Psalms, where using the word for the chiefs of the people instead of the firstborn of the people makes more sense. And so his theory, based upon what the scroll of Ippawar said, is that there was an earthquake on that night when the firstborn died. And so at the earthquake, all the houses of the chiefs of the people, they lived in brick houses. Brick houses don't do that well in earthquakes. And so this earthquake occurred. All the houses of the chiefs of the people, the rich people, the elite, all these houses collapsed and killed them. But the slaves lived in mud huts. And so the mud huts survived the earthquake. And so then you have the Hebrew slaves waking up the next day and coming out of their mud hut that they lived in, and the slave master and all these people are dead, and the nation is in chaos. And so the Hebrews just basically just walk out of Egypt. And interestingly enough, that also explains why the army was able to get together, because a lot of times you have the army living in tents. I know that they don't today, but even like Quonset huts and things like that in the military, when I was in the military, I mean, those things would stand up to an earthquake. Maybe not the modern barracks that we have, but that may explain why Pharaoh was then able to get the army together to go after them, because the army would have survived if they were living in tents in ancient Egypt. So that's one theory. I recommend getting his books anyway, especially this one, Worlds in Collision. It explains so much. And it also talks a lot about the calendar issues, why it is that the Jews today have a moon-based calendar instead of the solar calendar from Enoch. It's all explained in here. The whole like lunar calendar, lunar Sabbath, all that stuff comes straight out of Babylon. In fact, just Google ancient Babylonian calendar, and it is the lunar Sabbath calendar. Is exactly the same as the calendar the Jews keep today. The only difference is that the Jews today have the 7-day rotating week, but the people who keep the lunar Sabbath, who think that that's Yahuwah's original plan, well, it comes straight out of Babylon. That's what the Babylonians used to do. Just Google it. We know what the ancient Babylonian calendar is. We know more about that than the ancient Hebrew calendar. But even the month names are the same and everything. So anyway, that was it. I just I've probably been asked 20 times within the last 2 months about vegan or vegetarian Passover. So hopefully that explains it. I mean, the normal Orthodox Jewish Seder is vegan. You just usually you do the Seder, and then after the Seder you have a meal. Well, just for your meal, just cook vegan food like you always do, and that's it. Ditch the egg and ditch the shank bone. That's it. So hope that helps. Thanks for listening. Shalom.